You know, um, it is incredibly tempting, especially when you're staring down something as massive and, well, intimidating as learning an entirely new language, to just look for the secret door.
Oh, definitely. Like a shortcut.
Right.
Um,
A shortcut.
yeah.
Because, I mean, I know you're busy. We're all just navigating schedules that feel completely packed these days.
Yeah, constantly.
So when you're scrolling online and you see an ad that promises, that you can be fluent in 30 days, a very specific, tired part of your brain just lights up.
Right. You just think, I will absolutely take that one.
Exactly. We inherently want to bypass the friction and just jump straight to the reward.
It's an entirely understandable impulse. I mean, especially given the environment we operate in. We exist in a culture that has effectively conditioned us to view efficiency as like the highest possible virtue.
Oh, for sure. Optimize everything.
Right. The prevailing logic suggests that if you can accomplish a task faster, the method must be inherently superior. We try to optimize our morning routines, our workouts, our sleep.
And naturally, we try to optimize the way our neural pathways form.
Exactly. Which is biologically, well, problematic.
Right. And that brings us to today. We are going deep into some source material that completely dismantles that optimization mindset, at least when it comes to acquiring a language.
Yeah, it really flips the script.
It does. We're looking at excerpts from a really fascinating guide called The Art of Deep Fluency, a guide to slow English.
A great text.
And the mission for this deep dive is to figure out why trying to hack your way to knowledge is actually sabotaging your brain. We're going to explore why slamming your foot on the gas pedal is basically flooding your engine.
Yeah, and why deliberately slowing down isn't just, a nice lifestyle choice. It's actually the only genuine biological shortcut to actual fluency.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can learn how to slow down, we really need to understand why our fast-paced methods are failing us.
Right. We have to look at the friction between our cultural obsession with speed and the biological reality of how the brain acquires complex systems.
Yeah. And the material establishes a very clear premise early on. It says, a language is not a race to be won. It's a landscape to be explored.
I love that metaphor. Because you really cannot speedrun a landscape and expect to remember the topography.
You just blur right past it. So let's actually look at the mechanics of why that fast-paced method fails. Because the guide specifically calls out this era of fluency in 30 days.
Right, the whole hacking culture.
Yeah, and it describes this phenomenon called language anxiety. And when I was reading about how this anxiety physically affects the brain, I started thinking about memory as a busy corporate office.
Okay, I like this. Walk me through it.
So short-term memory is the overworked receptionist at the front desk, right?
Right.
And long-term memory is the secure filing cabinet in the back room.
That is actually a highly accurate way to visualize the architecture of memory consolidation. Let's take that corporate office analogy a step further to explain the biology.
Okay, go for it.
What's fascinating here is what happens when you rush. When you set a harsh 30-day deadline, or try to memorize 50 flashcards in 5 minutes, you are artificially inducing a state of stress.
So you're stressing out the receptionist.
Basically, yes. You are flooding that corporate office with cortisol and adrenaline. The brain's threat detector, which is the amygdala, starts ringing the fire alarm.
Oh, wow. So the receptionist is suddenly working in an office with blaring alarms and strobe lights.
Precisely. And what happens to incoming mail when the building is on fire?
I mean, you're definitely not filing it away neatly.
Exactly. The receptionist isn't carefully walking documents back to the secure filing cabinet. The amygdala actively overrides the hippocampus, which is the brain's memory center.
Wait, it just completely overrides
It shuts it down. The brain decides that storing the Spanish word for library or the English rules for past participle verbs is just not essential for immediate survival.
There's a fire.
Right. So the receptionist just throws the incoming mail directly into the incinerator. The biological doorway to long-term retention is, well, it's chemically bolted shut by your own stress hormones.
That is wild. And I mean, think about what that actually feels like for you, the listener. You have probably experienced this exact biological shutdown.
I think we all have, honestly.
Yeah. Maybe you were swiping through a digital language app at lightning speed at like 11:50 at night, just trying to maintain your daily streak before midnight.
Oh, the dreaded daily streak.
Right. Or you were cramming a list of industry vocabulary 10 minutes before logging onto a Zoom meeting. Your heart rate is slightly elevated. Your breathing is shallow.
But in that moment, you probably feel intensely productive. You feel the effort, so you naturally assume learning is happening.
Yeah, exactly. But the problem is that we easily confuse the physical sensation of effort with the actual neurological process of acquisition.
You're expending massive amounts of cognitive energy, but because of that cortisol block, nothing is moving from the front desk to the filing cabinet.
Because the next morning, the information is just gone. You sit down to recall that vocabulary and your brain just serves you a blank screen.
And it feels awful.
It does. It feels like a personal failure, like you just don't have a quote-unquote good memory. But what this guide points out is that it's not a personal failing at all.
No, it was a biological impossibility. You simply held the data in your short-term RAM while the stress of the rush actively prevented it from being saved to the hard drive.
Which brings us to the necessary pivot. Since rushing traps our brain in short-term stress, the logical solution is to just change our pace entirely.
Right. And the guide introduces the philosophy of slow living, but applied specifically to language acquisition.
Now, I have to admit, when I first read the phrase slow learning, I had a pretty strong skeptical reaction.
Really? How come?
Well, my immediate thought was, isn't slow learning just an excuse for being lazy?
Ah, right.
Like, it sounds like a very convenient rebrand for people who just don't want to put in the grueling hours of study, so they claim they are learning slowly to let themselves off the hook.
It is so easy to see how the word slow carries a negative connotation in our efficiency-obsessed culture. However, the distinction the author makes here is about depth, not lethargy.
Depth, okay.
Yeah. Slow learning actually requires immense focus. It just changes the target of that focus. Think of it as the difference between skimming a 300-page novel in an hour, just to say you finished it, versus spending an hour reading a single chapter.
Just savoring the author's syntax and understanding the subtext.
Exactly.
So it's about shifting the goalpost from volume to comprehension. And the guide gives this approach a very specific tactical name. They call it deep listening.
And this is where the methodology gets really concrete.
Yeah, here's where it gets really interesting. Because the metric they use to explain deep listening is what really stopped me in my tracks.
The 10-to-1 ratio.
Yes. The author argues that listening to the exact same 5-minute audio track 10 times is vastly more effective for fluency than listening to 50 minutes of new audio just once.
The mechanism behind that metric is really the crux of the entire slow learning philosophy. 50 minutes of novelty versus 5 minutes of repetition.
I understand the theory. But, realistically, listening to the same 5-minute clip 10 times over sounds completely counterintuitive.
And tedious, right?
Honestly, excruciatingly boring. Hustle culture dictates that if you carve out an hour to study, you need to consume an hour of brand new content to maximize your exposure.
But consider the cognitive load you are carrying during that hour of constant novelty. When you listen to 50 minutes of a new podcast in a target language, your brain is in a constant state of triage.
Because it's all new information.
Right. It's frantically trying to grab the main ideas, parse unfamiliar accents, and simply survive the flood of new sounds. You are constantly hovering right on the edge of that language anxiety we discussed.
You're skimming the surface just to keep from drowning.
Exactly. You aren't learning the language, you are just surviving the audio.
Wow, surviving the audio. That's a great way to put it.
Now, observe what happens biologically during deep listening. The first time you listen to that 5-minute audio, your brain does the heavy lifting of mapping the basic narrative terrain.
Like figuring out who is talking and generally what they're discussing.
Yes, but on the second and third pass, the predictability fundamentally alters your brain chemistry. The amygdala registers that there are no surprises here. The threat level drops to 0.
The fire alarm turns off?
The fire alarm turns off. By the 5th, 6th, and 10th listen, your brain is operating in a state of relaxed vigilance.
Oh, that makes sense.
Because you are no longer burning cognitive calories trying to figure out the overarching plot, your brain suddenly has the bandwidth to notice the architecture of the language.
You start hearing the subtle prepositions you missed the first time.
Right. You notice the slight intonations, the way a native speaker links two specific consonants together.
It's almost like watching a really complex movie for the second time. You already know the twist ending, so you finally have the mental space to notice the cinematography or, the subtle acting choices in the background.
That is a perfect parallel. And neurologically, this relaxed repetition is what builds the myelin sheath around your neural pathways.
Myelination.
Right. Myelination is the process where a neural connection is physically insulated, which makes the signal travel faster and more efficiently. Repetition in a low-stress environment is what thickens that insulation.
So it is literally wiring the language into the physical structure of your brain.
Yes.
That makes a profound biological sense. But practically speaking, I struggled with how you are supposed to actually implement this.
You mean in daily life?
Yeah. Say you're the listener right now. Your life is inherently chaotic. You have work deadlines, a flooded inbox, family obligations. You can't just declare, I am now living a slow, monastic life and retreat to a quiet room for hours of deep listening.
No, of course not.
So how does this philosophy survive contact with the real world?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the material tackles this reality directly through a framework called micro-moments of mindfulness.
Micro-moments.
Right. The objective is not to force you to carve out 3 uninterrupted hours of study time, because, honestly, trying to find that time would just generate more of the anxiety we're trying to avoid.
You just stress yourself out more.
Exactly. Instead, it is about identifying mundane daily routines you already perform and converting them into brief sanctuaries for language.
The guide offers a few really vivid examples of this, and the first one is called the tea ritual.
Yes, a very practical application.
The premise is incredibly simple. While you're going through the physical motions of making your morning coffee or brewing tea, you narrate your actions to yourself in English.
It layers linguistic intention over a pre-existing physical habit.
Right. But what struck me is how physical it is. You aren't sitting statically at a desk, staring at a glowing screen.
No, you're engaged with your environment.
You're standing in your kitchen, you feel the heat of the kettle, you smell the coffee grounds, and you just quietly articulate those sensations. Like, the water is boiling, I am pouring the water. The ceramic is warm.
The physicality is not accidental. It is the core mechanism at work. By anchoring the vocabulary to highly specific sensory inputs, like the smell, the heat, the physical motion, you are engaging multiple areas of the brain simultaneously.
That's fascinating.
Furthermore, a morning ritual like making tea is traditionally a low-stress, comforting environment. You are deliberately pairing the target language with a physiological state of calm.
Which means the receptionist is happy, the filing cabinet is open, and the vocabulary actually gets stored.
Precisely. You are sneaking the language past the stress barriers. And the second example the guide provides, which it calls active observation, builds on this by incorporating emotional tabbing.
I found active observation to be such a massive paradigm shift from how we are usually taught. Well, normally, vocabulary drills turn us into little robots. We look out a window and we just label objects. Tree, car, cloud, rain.
Right, rote memorization.
Exactly. It's entirely external and transactional. But this method asks you to look at the landscape and articulate the internal emotion the scene provokes.
It demands a much higher level of cognitive processing than simple object identification.
It really does. Instead of just seeing weather and saying rain, you spend a minute looking at the gray sky and you try to express the heavy clouds make me feel a bit nostalgic, or the sharp wind looks abrasive.
You are taking an external visual and connecting it directly to your internal emotional state.
Yeah, and from a neurochemical standpoint, emotional resonance is a powerful catalyst for memory, isn't it?
Absolutely. When a piece of information is tagged with an emotion, the brain releases dopamine, which essentially acts as a chemical highlighter. It signals to the hippocampus that this specific memory is worth keeping.
So by moving away from robotic labeling and toward emotional expression, you are forcing the brain to process the vocabulary on a much deeper, more personal level.
You're making it matter to the brain.
So what does this all mean? If the ultimate goal here is to inhabit this relaxed, emotionally resonant state of learning, we really have to look at the actual words we are using to construct that reality.
Because the vocabulary we possess dictates the boundaries of what we can experience.
Exactly. If we want to escape the 30-day hustle, we need the language to describe the alternative.
The language we use internally heavily influences our physiological state. To that end, the source curates what it calls a vocabulary for a calmer life.
I want to dive into these specific words because reading through them, I realize they aren't just definitions. They are completely different ways of orienting yourself to the world.
You really are.
Let's look at the word overwhelmed. Obviously, we use it to mean feeling like we have too much to handle. But if you look at the origins in the imagery of the word, It originally referred to a boat capsizing or being completely submerged under a wave.
The nautical imagery is incredibly fitting for the modern learner's experience.
It really is. When you are trying to cram months' worth of grammar rules into a weekend, you aren't just busy, you are capsizing. You are underwater and unable to breathe.
And learning the psychological weight of the word overwhelmed gives you the diagnostic tool to identify when you are triggering that language anxiety.
Right, you could stop and say, I am submerged right now. This is not a state where learning can occur.
Identifying the neurological state is the first prerequisite for changing it. Once you realize you are capsizing, you can reach for the counter vocabulary the text provides. Consider the phrase, to unwind.
That's another highly physical metaphor. You think of a tightly coiled spring or a knot pulled completely taut. The tension is stored in the physical structure.
Yes.
To unwind is the deliberate, gradual release of that potential energy. You cannot force a spring to uncoil instantly without breaking it. It requires a release of pressure over time.
Which is the exact antithesis of the fluency hack. You cannot hack the uncoiling of a spring. The process demands its own duration.
And that leads perfectly into the next phrase, which might be my favorite concept in the entire guide to soak in.
Oh, that's a brilliant one.
We use it to describe absorbing an experience or information completely. But think about the physical reality of a sponge soaking up water. It operates via capillary action. It is a slow, methodical spread of moisture.
Right. You cannot intimidate a sponge into absorbing water faster.
No.
Screaming at it or putting it on a strict 30-day deadline will not change the physics of capillary action.
Exactly. And your brain's synapses operate the exact same way. When you're practicing deep listening, when you are on your 7th repetition of that 5-minute audio track, you are just letting the brain soak in the syntax.
You aren't forcing the absorption, you are simply providing the environment where absorption naturally occurs.
I love that. You provide the environment.
There is a profound structural irony in the vocabulary the author has chosen to highlight here. The words themselves are instructions for the methodology.
Oh, that's so true.
Soaking in is the literal biological mechanism of deep fluency. Taking it easy is the prerequisite for keeping the amygdala calm so the hippocampus can function. The lexicon they provide reinforces the underlying neurobiology of the entire approach.
It is just a brilliant alignment of the medium and the message. It brings this entire exploration full circle right back to that initial beautiful premise. A language is a landscape to be explored, not a race to be won.
And that distinction is vital. A race demands speed, tunnel vision, and a massive expenditure of adrenaline to reach an arbitrary finish line.
Which just burns you out.
Right. A landscape demands presence, observation, and the willingness to wander without a timer running in the background.
When you finally abandon the race, when you stop trying to cram thousands of vocabulary words into a panic-burning corporate office, your brain finally drops its defenses.
The cortisol dissipates.
The receptionist calms down.
Oh.
And your mind is finally free to do the deep, quiet work of actual learning. You stop trying to hack the system and you start absorbing the world.
And honestly, all of this evidence regarding how the physiological stress of rushing actively prevents our brains from forming long-term memories leaves us with a fairly urgent question.
I think so, yeah.
We have seen definitively how the demand for speed creates the failure in language learning.
The rush is the actual roadblock.
Correct. This raises an important question. If this biological mechanism holds true for language, we must ask ourselves, what other complex skills, professional endeavors, or even human relationships are we fundamentally sabotaging right now because we are too busy looking for the 30-day hack?
That is an incredibly heavy and necessary question to leave on. Where else are we setting the building on fire, trying to rush a process that simply requires time? The next time you feel that familiar panic to optimize, to learn faster, to find the shortcut, remember the biology of the sponge? Sometimes the only real shortcut there is, the only way to actually retain anything of value is to just slow down and let yourself soak it in.